Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. In the last few months, we've seen escalation in relations between the United States and Venezuela. In fact, we've seen the Trump administration pivoting to focus quite heavily on Latin America, especially in recent weeks. Time will tell if this will be a temporary pivot, but for today, Trump's focus clearly remains on Venezuela. So today, I'll explore the background of Venezuela, the clashes that Venezuela has had with Guyana over the Essequibo region, and how Venezuela's election from last year started this process that has raised tensions with the United States. Next episode, which will come out on Tuesday, I'll then explore potential scenarios around the United States and their current deployment in the Caribbean that is spiking tensions even further with Venezuela. But for now, let's dive into Venezuela's background. So, Venezuela is located on the northern edge of the South American continent. Its capital, Caracas, is the country's primary centre for industry, commerce, and education. The territory was colonised by Spain in 1522, and in 1811, it became one of the first Spanish-American territories to declare independence from the Spanish. It became a full sovereign country in 1830. During the 19th century, military dictators ensured that political turmoil remained until the mid-20th century. From 1958, we saw some democratic governments rule, but economic shocks and a series of coups led to shifts in leadership and a distancing from democratic elections under Hugo Chavez, and today under Nicolas Maduro. Today, this leaves Venezuela in a period of serious democratic backsliding, and the negative impact is being felt by everyday Venezuelans. Shortages and high inflation has seen over 7 million people leave Venezuela since 2014. Another domestic issue in Venezuela is the territorial ambitions of Maduro. Since the early 19th century, Venezuela has claimed the territory of Guyana that sits to the west of the Essequibo River. In recent years, we've seen tensions spike in this area. The general premise of this issue is that Venezuela sought to control the Essequibo region to access Guyana's emerging oil resources. Maduro called a referendum in which 95% of respondents reportedly agreed with a Venezuelan move to annex the region. It is notable that this referendum had an incredibly low turnout. This issue also dragged the Brazilians in, since the Essequibo region sits on their northern border. In December 2023, the Brazilians moved military assets into the region to act as a deterrent against aggression from Venezuela. Brazil has since also vetoed Venezuela's membership aspirations for BRICS. Maduro placed himself in a tough situation here because he either had to commit to annex the territory of Essequibo, which would have seen him potentially have to tackle the Brazilians and the United States, or Maduro had to back off and look weak. Ultimately, he backed off, but tensions in the area have remained heightened since. In fact, even a few weeks ago, Guyana claimed that gunfire was exchanged between themselves and the Venezuelans over the Cuyuni River. But, as I alluded to earlier, other domestic tensions, specifically revolving around politics, also sit at an elevated level in Venezuela. This political environment was worsened after Venezuela's presidential election that occurred in July of 2024. Now, this election was far from straightforward, and we're still seeing consequences emerge from this election today. Maduro was supposedly elected for a third consecutive term with 51.2% of the vote. But in the run-up to this election, he disqualified many candidates from running, including the leading candidate, Maria Corina Machado, of the Unitary Platform Party. When Machado was disqualified from running, Corina Yoris was selected as her replacement, but she was unable to register after the Electoral Commission blocked her from doing so. Maduro and his United Socialist Party of Venezuela did eventually run against Edmundo González. He had been selected as a placeholder candidate until another one was chosen, but after a few weeks, the Unitary Platform Party decided to stick with him. By this point, González was the only candidate who was representing the Venezuelan opposition in the election. The polls before the election indicated a González win, which of course clashed with the National Electoral Council's published results of a Maduro victory. In response to this data being released by the National Electoral Council, the Unitary Platform Party stated that González had won with 67.19% of the vote, versus Maduro, who had secured just over 30% of the vote. This clash shows that domestic politics in Venezuela are incredibly high stakes. Quality of life has been declining for citizens since the early 2010s, and sanctions pressure hasn't eased, albeit for a small period. The pressure on Venezuela's economy is also driven by declining crude oil exports that have been dropping off since 2015. This coincided with Maduro starting to consolidate his grip over Venezuelan politics. In 2015, Maduro saw the opposition win elections, and they held a majority in the National Assembly. In response to his decline in power, Maduro's outgoing National Assembly secured the Supreme Tribunal of Justice, which is Venezuela's highest court, with a number of Maduro's allies. The tribunal then stepped in and stripped 3 elected opposition members of their seats. This then meant that the opposition didn't possess a supermajority in parliament that would have allowed them to pass rulings alone. In 2017, Maduro then sought to replace Venezuela's 1999 constitution. This saw the opposition boycott this election, and so Maduro and his United Socialist Party of Venezuela won almost all the seats in the new Constituent National Assembly. This new Constituent National Assembly would be the group that would be determining this new constitution. This new Constituent National Assembly then declared itself to be the branch of government with supreme power in Venezuela. This then led the opposition-led National Assembly to be banned from performing any actions that would interfere with this new National Assembly. As a result, the opposition-led elected National Assembly was stripped of all their powers. In 2018's election, Maduro once again banned opposition parties from participating, and he won once again. He was then pressured to step down in the aftermath of this election. The National Assembly invoked a clause from the 1999 Venezuelan Constitution to install the Speaker of the National Assembly as acting president in a transitional government. But a year later, this transitional government had failed, and Maduro continued to control Venezuela's major institutions. We saw similar trends unfold in the 2024 election, as I've alluded to. There was some hope for this election beforehand, because we saw an agreement between the United States and Venezuela. In this agreement, sanctions were lifted on Venezuela in return for free and fair elections being held in the country. But when it was clear that this wasn't occurring based on Maduro's actions, the United States reimposed sanctions on Venezuela. In the aftermath of the 2024 election, we saw protests erupt. We also saw countries in South America respond to Venezuela's election. We also saw Peru recall its ambassador and expelled Venezuelan diplomats from its own country. We saw Panama suspend diplomatic relations with Venezuela, and Venezuela also broke relations with Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Peru, Panama, the Dominican Republic, and Uruguay. Lula in Brazil also stated that he wouldn't recognize the results as legitimate. Maduro then called for Machado and González to go to prison for inciting protests. Immediately after the election, many of Machado and González's allies were holed up in the Argentine Embassy in Caracas, and they weren't allowed safe passage out of the country. In May 2025, we saw 5 of Machado's allies extracted from Venezuela, and they arrived in the United States. González was granted asylum in Spain in September 2024, so he is no longer in Venezuela, but Machado herself remains in hiding within the country. And we saw an interview from Machado with Elle that was released a few days ago. If you head over to Substack, you will find the link for that interview in the list of sources at the bottom of the post. So it's clear from the protests that emerged after the 2024 election that citizens in Venezuela are unhappy, but they're also massively suppressed. Their quality of life has been declining, and inflation and shortages make it difficult to access necessities reliably. But Maduro has been under pressure for a decade now, and he hasn't shifted his stance. But what has changed in recent months is that the United States is now paying much closer attention. This leads me to the question, are we about to see dramatic shifts unfold in Venezuela? This escalation in tensions over recent months has seen the United States relocate military assets off the coast of Venezuela. The United States has also struck 2 vessels that have been linked to Venezuela in recent weeks. So the United States now faces a choice between containment of Venezuela or confrontation. It's this issue that will lead to next episode that will be released on Tuesday. Will we see the United States continue to knock at the door of Venezuela, or will they kick the door off its hinges? That's all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, why not leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice? I've been Dylan. I'll talk to you next time.